Hey, welcome back to In the Chute. This is where Kalen has a question for me for either a comment or some sassy type of response. What do you got, Kalen?
Sassy. Socialization of colts. We this year got two colts, thankfully. We've bred some mares to hopefully get more colts next year, or foals, however people say it. We say colts, foals. Colts are normally the males, fillies are the females. But yeah, generally speaking, we say colts. What is the process? What are the things you do? What are the things that we provide, add, pull from normal animal socialization amongst the horse herd to help socialize the foals that we get every year?
Well, I think you can call it socializing and imprinting and use those words synonymously, those processes, but they really are a little bit different. That we are looking at doing both of those things. One is imprinting with a colt or imprinting ourselves on them so that they're not fearful of us. We can put our hands on them. They come to us, go out in the pasture, and they'll leave their mother and come up to say hi, get some scratching, pick their feet up, put your fingers in their mouth or their ears, rub them all over, scratch them, and just to have them enjoy your company. That really is what it's about. And then we actually put a halter on them early on, and we teach them to lead so that we can do whatever we want to do with them at any time. And that starts as soon as possible after that first nursing, when they're on their feet, unsteady as it is, but nursing, and that mare has complete and total uh, control of them, then we step in and go ahead and don't disrupt that natural imprinting with a mother, but imprint them onto us so that we have a lot easier time handling them. They're not afraid of us. That also transfers into the training later on and the process up through just more familiarization as yearlings after you wean them. And so that's kind of the imprinting in a real short sense of what we do. Now the socialization is a little bit different. You can have two mares that foal on the same day, put them in the same pasture, and they will stay away from each other. They do not want another mare or anybody else around their fresh foal. And so they will kind of try to isolate themselves or stay away from each other. They get owly with each other. And so they're just trying to keep that colt or foal just as absolutely protected as possible. And then as time goes on, those foals will find each other, and they'll go, oh, hey, wait, it's almost like, what did that come from? So, and what is it? Why does it smell like everything else that is good and wholesome around me? So they'll do that, and they'll find each other, and then pretty soon they buddy up and they start playing. That's a socialization to me. It's also a socialization to other horses that are either on the other side of the fence line or in a corral, or I'm working a horse, and they get to know each other through the fence, that are just becoming horses, and they have some inherent social skills or social defenses. For instance, if they get scared, they'll snap their mouth, you know, open and closed, and it's just a signal that, hey, I'm just a baby, don't hurt me. I'm no threat whatsoever. So that those are kind of inherent, but they don't really know. When you get too close, you might get nipped at, or you stick your nose in the flank of a mare that's not milking. She may not appreciate that. So they don't necessarily know. So they learn those things, and so that's kind of the socialization part of that. Now, then you can extend that on to other people. We imprint them up on ourselves, but then if somebody comes around and we're working them and have been working them in the imprinting type of scenario, then we're really not necessarily imprinting at that point. When other people come around, then you're kind of socializing them, because you're not necessarily um, getting over the natural fear that they would have, because they're over that. Now they're just kind of learning what somebody else is, and you could probably take that argument and say, no, you're still imprinting, and that's okay. It doesn't matter one way or the other at that point when the work is done. But uh, as I said in the beginning, you can call pretty much synonymous, but that's where I draw the line on what it means and why. So imprinting versus socialization starts at day one, and it really is a head start, and a giant head start in my opinion, in so many ways, and has with most every horse we've ever worked, or we've worked horses for someone else who's never been handled. And some of those are, it's obvious, they're fearful for the most part, wild, scared. This is all about, hey, how am I going to stay alive? And why am I doing this? Instead of that imprinting originally, with whoever was or should have been there, and then the socialization after the fact, with people. So they get it with horses if there's many horses around, but that people aspect that's a big change for them.
I would say the initial imprinting that we do in the first week to week and a half of their foal is probably the most important because it's getting them over that fear that you've talked about, getting the hands on, getting them used to people and so on and so forth. It, especially because if we do need to kind of hold on to them to put the halters on, we when we imprint, we're it's just a whole lot easier to deal with the strength of the horse
Yeah.
than it
Oh,
is to
that's
wait a
true.
couple weeks.
Yep.
But would you say what's more important overall for, I guess, the longevity of the lessons learned for the horse? Is it when they are that young, or is it when they're closer to when they're weanlings and they, like these two, for example, of this year, when they wean, they'll be together and you'll probably go out there, a couple times a day and just handle them, talk to them, go visit them, and they'll become their own little personalities more and more during that time. But which phase would you say is probably more important in terms of the long lasting effects? Is it more when they're absolute brand new babies, or when they've been weaned off their mom, they're starting to figure out, things on their own, even though they got a partner with them, but they're more on their own by that point?
No,
What's
that
kind of
that's
more long lasting?
it's a very good question because you can do one without the other.
Yeah,
You can imprint a horse at birth, and for that, week to 10 days or so, that's, or call it less than 2 weeks, that's very important, and turn that horse loose and never touch them again until, they're 2, 3 years old, and they are still going to be largely like a wild horse, or not a wild horse, but a
a
feral
feral.
horse,
Yeah,
where they're going to have some real fear or real respect, or some hesitancy, just because they're a flight or fight animal. So that first aspect is very important, but you can overcome that quickly. It's surprisingly, to me, how fast you can overcome that if they've been imprinted and not handled after that. And that's why it's the handling it as weanlings is so important, I think, because you're just, again, um, you're restructuring that little brain in a continuing manner of what you did earlier. So the mother's just absent now, and a lot of times those horses will want someone to be around, and you're not there all the time, so that familiarization is good, but you're not overdoing it. So you get to be kind of like Disneyland to them, especially if they like what's going on. You have to discipline them because they'll get nippy and bitey. They do that with each other. That's that natural horse behavior. Figuring out who they are, just as you said, their personalities, even within a couple of weeks, their personalities really start coming out. But as weanlings, they really do, and you'll have some that are more dominant than others, and they'll try to dominate you. So you have to be really diligent about making them mind and being respectful of you as a dominant herd member. So by doing that, then that carries on, especially well into later training. So, because really what you're doing is you're imprinting them twice at two different stages of their life, even though it's within just a couple of months apart. But it really reinforces, um, that you're not a bad person. You're kind of fun to be around. And oh yeah, they're just like my mom. My mom would discipline me when I did something wrong, and so will they. So, but not that they won't try it, because that's what they're supposed to do. They're herd animal. They're trying to vie for dominance, and get it any way they can, and you have to be dominant. So then once, if you have that happen, you're really well on your way to a training. Now you could not train that, or not have any imprinting at all on a horse, and then bring it in, wean it, and start handling it. And in a fairly short amount of time, you can get your hands on it, start playing with it. It's a little bit rougher, more cumbersome, because these horses are bigger at that point. you're talking a yearling that, they might be 500 pounds, 600 pounds. And, good luck trying to maintain any kind of a strength competition with them and come out on top. So you really want to ease your way into it. You got to just be a little bit slower, a little bit more deliberate. You don't have to be sloppy with your movements like you do after you've imprinted a colt. You can do a lot of things like put a halter on them like a normal trained horse, and they'll largely stand for it. Where you take somebody who's not been imprinted, try to bring them in as a yearling or a weanling, and start handling them fast like you would have the ability to a younger one, and that's not going to work so well. So, there's delays or um, big gaps in some of the learning there, but they will catch up, especially if you put more time into it. And that's what it takes is a lot more time and a lot more dedication to keep that relationship going as a yearling or a weanling. And it's probably not as fun because they're in that teenage stage in their life where they're little snots and they're not cute little babies anymore. So sometimes people don't play with these colts like they should, or sometimes they overdo it and don't have the discipline for that animal when they are doing their biting, nipping, trying to establish their dominance. And then you'll create a monster that thinks that they rule the world.
What's easier to deal with, a pair or a trio? Normally, that's how it works for us. I think the most we've probably ever had was 4 or 5 at a time, but
Yeah,
what's
five,
easier,
six,
a
yeah.
small group or a pair, or working with an individual, foal or weanling? What in terms
Yeah.
of long-lasting effects and being able to come up to them, get them used to you, and get them to be more accepting overall, what's probably the better outcome?
Well, it depends on what your priority is. I mean, if you're looking at something that you don't want to spend a lot of time with, one or two horses is pretty easy, because you're just out there for a little bit of time. And typically, when they're running together like that, you'll get them at the same time, and you'll be able to play
Right,
with one. And the one that's a little bit more gregarious or curious will come up to you. They've got less fear, and the other one may hang back just a little bit, or they may be just as gregarious or feel just as comfortable as the other one. And you'll have them both right there at the same time, and you can play with them both, touch them. I mean, literally simultaneously, and get between them, do the same thing on one side as you're doing on the opposite side of the other one. Um, it takes time to do that, but when you've got, I know I think we've had 5, 6 colts at a time. We try not to breed more than that, but we're not trying to puppy mill these
right.
horses. We're trying to make a good quality product, but uh, if you did that with say a half a dozen colts, then you got to spend 3 times the amount of time at best because you're working them in pairs. And if you've got all 5, 6 of them at the same time, somebody's usually on the outside a little bit, and you got to spend some time trying to make sure that you're getting some time with them. And so it's all about time if that's your priority. Um, and if it's not your priority, then you're probably going to have some horses not turn out too well because you're not going to spend the time with them. So you've got to do that. Um, Working 3 at a time is a whole lot easier than a whole bunch, but um, 2 is probably pretty easy. 1 that's a cake, but you can really get a lot of bang for your buck working 2 horses together because you're getting lessons at the same time on those 2. So, uh, not having a 3rd wheel out there really is actually kind of beneficial.
Yeah. Well, that is socialization and imprinting for Colts from the Hashknife Ranch. And with that, we will put this conversation out to pasture.